Hey y'all, welcome back to the Fox and Compass, or welcome if you're new here. Today we're going to be talking about capitalism and a few other related subjects. The reason we're talking about this rather political subject is because it is very important to understand why MLM companies are allowed to run rampant in our country. Other countries have outright banned them. Why haven't we? What led to MLMs becoming so prevalent in our society anyway? To figure that out, we need to have a basic understanding of what capitalism is and how it contributes to these companies. Because it's not just MLM companies either. There are heaps of unethical, immoral, downright exploitative businesses out there, and it's due in large part to capitalism. I want to make this as simple as possible, which is difficult because economics in general is a sort of vast subject full of weasel words, heated debates, and lots of supposition. There are different types of capitalism and each has their own definition, but for the sake of time and simplicity, we're going to be speaking broadly about capitalism in general. I will very likely be creating a video down the line about the various types of capitalism, but for today, for simplicity's sake, let's just define capitalism. Before we get too far into this, let me define some things for you. This is a little dry, but bear with me because these are important definitions, I promise, and I will put them up on the screen so that you can read them as I read them. So economics is defined as the branch of knowledge concerned with the production, consumption, and transfer of wealth. Politics is defined as the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Corporation, a company or group of people authorized to act as a single entity, legally a person, and recognized as such in law. Socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Capitalism is defined as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. According to Investopedia, capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or corporations own capital goods, i.e. factories, raw materials, and the means/tools of production. The production of goods and services is then based on supply and demand in the general market, known as the market economy, rather than through central planning, known as a planned economy or a command economy. Investopedia also went on to describe the core tenets of capitalism like free markets, competition, and the driving force of making a profit, and the need for private property. So let's talk about the difference between personal, private, and public property, actually. Public property is property owned by the state, like parks, roads, government buildings. Private property is property owned by private entities such as corporations, businesses, nonprofits, and the like. Personal property is what you own: your house, car, clothes, your toothbrush, etc. In your internet travels, you might hear leftists call for the abolition of private property. They are speaking strictly about the private property owned by private entities, that is, businesses and corporations, not people. Like utility companies, food production, and other such things that leftists don't generally believe should be in the hands of a private entity. It should be community or state run. Leftists, and this may vary depending on the leftist you're talking to, tend to believe that these things should be in the hands of the state, which means it's in the hands of the people as a whole. Also, I should note, depending on the leftist that you're talking to, houses may not be considered personal property because there are many who believe housing should be freely available to all and, again, controlled by the state/community. So what does all of that mean, really? Well, it means that a country's industry and way to make money is in the hands of private entities more than it is in the hands of the state as things stand right now. In a socialist economy, those things would be in the control of the state, which, remember, is something that should be run by the people. To better understand the pro-capitalist standpoint, I searched far and wide for articles on the matter. I finally found one that sort of took all of the talking points I'd seen and put it into one article. In a 2019 issue of Forbes magazine, Steve Forbes wrote an article titled, "Capitalism Will Save Us If Only We Let It." This article was really hard for me to get through, no lie, because rich white dudes talking down to the little people is highly obnoxious, but I did give it a fair shot. I read the whole thing and kept an open mind as he discussed his position. Forbes said, "Capitalism, free enterprise, free markets, whatever you label our system, is moral because one succeeds by meeting the needs and wants of other people." He goes on to talk about all of the fiscal disasters in American history and points the finger at government mismanagement, insisting the system would work if only the government would stand back and let the free hand of the market do its thing. Forbes also discusses the capitalist idea that high taxes and government regulation hurts the economy, and if we allowed free markets, healthcare, poverty, and inequality would all be solved, though he doesn't really say how except to blame government regulation. A major capitalist talking point is something oft repeated in this article in a variety of ways. The free market creates abundance while regulation creates scarcity. Forbes continues saying that yes, people and businesses do bad things, but that's not the fault of capitalism, and it isn't to be helped by regulation either, because the market can and should regulate itself if only the government would back off. Let's look at anti-capitalist talking points now. In the hunt for a solid source on anti-capitalist ideals, I came across a bunch of articles with some variation of capitalism is evil in them. I don't really like that language. I think that calling something evil tends to detract from the argument itself. We need to talk about the points and not just make blanket statements that essentially they create a straw man and it doesn't contribute to the debate at all. Because yes, capitalism causes a whole lot of bad things. Like a lot of bad things that cannot be denied. It's killing people and destroying the environment, but let's make sure to discuss those points rather than make an emotional, declarative, absolute statement without any sufficient discussion, So what are the anti-capitalist talking points? What do people who oppose this system have to say about it? One of the biggest arguments against capitalism is the idea that we need to deregulate the markets for them to flourish. There are heaps of real-world examples where deregulation actually causes more harm than good. For instance, Texas' power system. Don't really need to say more than that. Another example is factories and chicken farms dumping waste wherever they want, prompting the creation of the EPA, which was defunded, actually, under Trump's regime. Deregulation is basically a golden ticket to companies who aren't interested in doing things the right way so much as they are interested in saving money to increase profit. Another major argument against capitalism is the fact that capitalism doesn't account for the elderly, the disabled, or even children. Because they can't work within the system, they do not hold value within the system. Capitalism, since it values profit over people, causes companies to outsource work to other countries where they can hire people for literally pennies an hour to create products to sell in the United States for like a 4,000% or more markup on costs. And equality and equity are virtually non-existent under capitalism. If you don't have access to good nutrition, a solid education, or even just support from your community, which capitalism strips away from you, you can't get ahead. Capitalism actively oppresses people of color, disabled people, and queer people. And for what? Profit. There is a much longer list of what's wrong with capitalism, in my opinion, but let's stick with those for now, because most anti-capitalist talking points do center around the idea that profit should not be the basis for an economy, and regulation would help that. In the opinion of most anti-capitalists, profit pocketed is theft and should instead be funneled back into the company to improve working conditions, wages, and job. So where do I stand? A lot of people hear the words socialism and capitalism and don't really know what they mean, and people on either side of the debate tend to use the words as scare words. Socialism isn't any more evil than capitalism is. I would argue that it's way less evil. Socialism, at its core, is just democracy in all things. Capitalism isn't inherently on paper evil, but in practice it's unsustainable and literally kills people. Capitalism relies heavily on this concept of infinite economic growth, but as scientists and people like David Attenborough have pointed out, is infinite growth even possible on a finite planet? Corporations actively do shit daily that harms our planet and every living creature on it for the sake of profit, like those chicken farmers dumping their waste into lakes, the deforestation all throughout the world, and especially the exploitation of animals and humans alike for the sake of profit. Like when MLMs rely on and exploit vulnerable populations to sell their products without paying them what they're worth. It's basically free advertising, and these companies know that. Or say you disagree with me on the harmful impact of MLMs. Corporations exploit people in other ways too, like paying people in third world countries pennies an hour to sew Nike soccer balls. Listen, capitalism isn't sustainable, not just because there is really no such thing as infinite resources, but also because if a system continues to exploit the working class and poor people, eventually the system will work everyone to death. I think Karl Marx said it best when he said, not only can we manage very well without the interference of the capitalist class in the great industries of the country, but that their interference is becoming more and more a nuisance. So what does this have to do with fighting MLMs and unethical business practices? So do you remember how I said that capitalists believe there should be a free market with no regulation? MLM exists because of lack of regulation. It's even worse than that, though. There are bad actors at every stage of government, even within the FTC itself, ensuring that MLM lives on. Why is this allowed to happen? Because no one has regulated the ability for this to happen. MLMs are able to lobby the government in order to stay safe and relevant. It's very rare, given how many terrible MLM companies are out there, for any to actually face real consequences for their actions. And this isn't just a problem with MLMs either. These shitty business gurus work within an industry that is largely unregulated. Major corporations like Amazon don't even pay taxes and are so unregulated that workers actually die on the warehouse floor. Amazon and Jeff Bezos are so unregulated that Bezos actually owns an entire news outlet, The Washington Post. I can post a whole video on Amazon and how they basically control the planet in the future. Because as an author and small business owner, the idea that most of the money I make comes through Amazon is seriously bothersome. Anyway, the solution, in my opinion, is to get money out of politics. If our government made it illegal for lobbyists to pay our lawmakers money for a specific vote on certain bills, then perhaps regulation could be more strictly created and enforced. Lack of regulation plus ridiculous amounts of money going to congresspeople in exchange for a specific vote, bribery, have created this perfect storm of unethical businesses and corporate scams. It allows people to take advantage of vulnerable, desperate people. MLMs and other unethical businesses prey on the victims of this system to make money, and honestly, it's thick. So I've laid out the pro and anti-capitalist stances. I've discussed my thoughts, and I discussed how capitalism has affected the MLM world. I want to know your thoughts, though. Where do you stand on the capitalism debate? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious. And don't be afraid to comment if you're pro-capitalism. I used to be an objectivist libertarian. I completely understand the pro side of this debate, even if I no longer agree with it. Anyway, that's all I have for y'all today. Thanks for watching. Bye, y'all.